Thank you for joining us for this DDi CADcast. My name is Cody Armstrong, and the topic is What's New 2014 SolidWorks Fundamentals Part 2. So the next thing I want to get into are the enhancements to equations, and in particular, configurable equations. There's also a view option in the equations dialog box, but the big enhancement for the 2014 release are the enhancements to configurable equations. So let's jump right into it. Now, the big thing here is it's not so much an overhaul or a brand new functionality as it is ease of use. So one of the big things with previous versions of the software is when you tried to build an equation that was configuration specific, you had to first build the equation and then specify a configuration all from the equations dialog. Well, now in the 2014 version, I can build an equation specific to a configuration right from the modify. So for instance, let's say that I wanted to set this table equal to one another, right? I want to set it and make a square version. Here you see I've built a square configuration of this table. And of course the smart thing to do is to set this equal to this, right? So I go into this dialog and I want to build an equation right from modify. And we could build an equation from modify in the past, but the moment you hit equal and started to build your configuration in previous version, you did not get the option to specify configuration. That option went away. Well, now in the 2014 release, I can set it equal to another dimension and specify this configuration. And that's really what's new. In the past, I could set it equal to another value, but then I had to go to Tools, Equations, and suppress it in the other configurations. Right, so it's a little bit simpler workflow. When I set this to this configuration, OK, and rebuild, of course I end up with a square table. But the big thing now is this equation that I just created is only in the square configuration. And again, just to recap that, when I go to Tools, Equations, in the past you had to do this here. I had to come in and suppress suppress the equation depending on which configuration I had loaded. Now you'll see if I turn on the rectangular table configuration that equation automatically goes away. Right? So there's no longer a need to come into equations and make sure that your equations only apply to the configurations that you're trying to apply them to. Now this not just applies to equations, but also global variables. Global variables are also now configurable. Right? So when I build a new global variable, you're going to see an option to specify a configuration. This also means, and this is a big one for a lot of users, for users of design tables, you can now configure a global variable via a design table, which again you couldn't really do in previous versions. So just some enhancements to equations, and in particular the interface for configuring equations has gotten much simpler, right? No longer do you have to call up the equations dialog just to make sure that your equations are specific to the configuration that you're trying to apply them to. You can do it right from the modify box. Another enhancement is this new sketch equation view. So if I have sketch equations, right, driving, I can add, rename, edit. I can do all those things to sketch dimensions right from the sketch equation view icon here. So you see this is essentially a new filter for you to filter through equations, global variables, dimensions, and so on. Okay, but that's the new sketch equation view icon in the equations dialog box. So let's jump back, and I want to move on to some of the other fundamental enhancements for 2014. So I'd like to spend the remainder of this CADcast on fundamentals on the topic of graphics. There are some enhancements to graphics. Most of these pertain to PhotoView users, so I'm not going to go into great detail on each one of these. But for PhotoView users, we've increased the accuracy of environment lighting. So for those having issues with shadows caused by environment lighting in PhotoView 360 and previous versions, there's a new option in your scene for accurate environment lighting. Now it's going to slow the performance of the render down, but it'll give you more accurate shadows from your environment lighting in PhotoView. Also in 2014 is the support for exporting SolidWorks models to LXO files, Luxology Scene. So if you work with Modo, it's a very common format, and now we can export SolidWorks models to that format, LXO. And you'll just see it in the Save As menu. Flatten floors and scenes, I'm going to actually show you that in just a moment. That's a neat option for scenes for PhotoView in 2014. Creating graphics-only section views, We couldn't do this in previous versions. You could not create a graphics only section. You also could not create a section view of a surface model, which we can now do in 2014. So those are enhancements to section views. And then lastly, just some general performance improvements to rendered animations that should make rendered animations much faster. So what I like to focus on this slide is the flatten floors and scenes option when you're editing your scene. Before I jump into that, there is one real quick thing I wanted to cover that every user is going to see in the 2014 release, and that is a small interface change to the scenes menu. So you see the scenes drop down here. In previous releases, this is a very long list, and every year it got a little bit bigger with new scenes and so on. So what they've done now is incorporate a favorites theme into the scene. So it's very similar to defining materials, for instance. You have your list of favorites, and I can define those favorites by going to Manage Favorites and selecting the favorites I want from the list. You'll notice some new scenes in this list as well, which is the primary reason for incorporating a favorites style theme into it. Is just simplifies the access to it. The list was getting longer and longer, and it was more and more difficult to find the scene that you're looking for. So now with the 2014 release, you will have a list of favorites and the ability to manage favorites for your scenes. When I edit a scene in the 2014 version, let's apply a background first. Let's apply a background of landscape. You see some of these landscaped images or backgrounds that we have options for in 2014. I'm going to go ahead and edit scene, and with the background type set to environment, use environment, you'll see an option to flatten floor. Okay? And what it does is it places your model on the floor of your image. Now there are two things this is based on. You must have it set to use environment. Also, real view must be on. But with those two things set, you have the option to flatten floor, and again, it makes it look as though your model is sitting on the floor of whatever image you've chosen as your scene. So definitely new scene option, cool scene option, flatten floor when you're defining your scene with PhotoView 360. Let's jump back here. One of the last things I want to focus on with regards to graphics is the ability to do selective section views, which is a new enhancement for 2014, and then lastly, enhancements for solar axis studies. So the ability to specify components or bodies that you want to section has always been a limitation, and a lot of end users ask the question, well, how do I go about creating a cutaway section view? Where I have, maybe a case component and I want to section the case but leave all the other internal components intact. And we never really had a great way of accomplishing this. Alright, we do assembly level cuts, maybe use feature scope to specify which components I want to cut, but we didn't really have a way in the section view command to specify which components we want to section. Well, now in the 2014 version, when I call up a section view, you're going to see an option for selected components. And this allows me to choose which components I either want to exclude from the section view or include in the section view. Okay? And so I can very selectively say, okay, I want to section this but not this, and define which components I actually want to section. Right? And so for those looking to create cutaway section views of assemblies like this, it's a very useful tool and something we, in previous versions, had to use what I'd consider workarounds to accomplish. Assembly level cuts, use feature scope to define the parts. So there's a lot more steps involved in previous versions. Now you can just define which parts you want to exclude or include in the section view. Also nice is the ability to save this view. I can save this view, which of course means I can insert that view into my drawing, which is what a lot of people are looking for with cutaway section views, is how do I get a cutaway view into my drawing file. So save the view, insert the view into the drawing is an easy way to accomplish that. And that is the new selected components enhancement to the section view, the ability to specify which components you would actually like to section. What I want to jump into next are the new solar axis studies. Now, solar axis studies allow me to simulate the sun's movement throughout a day or given days, right? And how that sunlight impacts the shadows cast by my design. Now, of course, the big element to this is sunlight. And actually, if you go to the lights, and I right-click to add a new light, you'll see a new type of light right here, Add Sunlight. Now, of course, sunlight relies on a direction, so I can specify north here, right? And it requires a location. And we have some predefined locations, New York, LA, some common locations. But you can actually specify your location. You see here at the bottom, specify location. And so I can go in and figure out my latitude and longitude coordinates and punch those in and get a very accurate idea of the sunlight at my location. Right? In my case, I'm just going to use Los Angeles, and it punches in the coordinates for Los Angeles. And then I'll hit OK. And now you'll see the sunlight cast on my model. So that's the first step. And of course, the solar axis study is going to require sunlight, so I have to add that before I define my study. Now, the solar axis study is actually in the motion studies. Right? So I'm going to go down to my motion study tab, and in the animation wizard, you're going to see a new type, solar axis study. I define solar axis study, I hit next. Now I have two different options. I can have a fixed date variable time, which means on November 25th from 8 to 5 p.m. for instance. Or I can say fixed time variable date, which means through the entire month of November, show me 8 a.m. Right, so I can define it either way. I'm going to use fixed date variable time, hit next. What day, right? What time zone, and what range. In my case, I'm just going to run sunrise to sunset. Okay, hit next. When do you want it to start? Well, I want it to start at 0 and go to 10 seconds. And that's really it. I hit finish. Right? It loads the solar axis study, and then I have to calculate that study. Okay? So just like I would any other motion study, I hit calculate, and it starts cranking away. Now, solar axis studies will take a little bit of time to run. You'll see as I go through this, it'll slowly start cranking away here and giving me kind of a preview of what it's going to look like. And it also breaks down where it's at on the right-hand side. So you'll see current time, 6:57 a.m. Sunrise is at 6:43, sunset 4:41. Here's my latitude and longitude coordinates, and here's the date of this study. So it gives me a complete breakdown of all the details of the solar axis study in that bottom right corner. And you can actually see, as it jumps from step to step, the preview update, and you actually see the current time update as well. So there's the shadow cast at 11 a.m., right? And there's an update, that's it at 11:56 a.m. And so it gives me a real accurate idea of what the shadow may look like given a certain period or a certain time of that day. Now, once this study is done, I'll have one fluid animation showing the shadows and what they'll look like given certain periods of time during the day. And that's really where it comes in handy. If I wanted to build a model of my shop and see, what the shadows are going to look like at 1 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon versus 6 o'clock in the morning, I can do that with a solar axis study. So now that this is done running, if I hit play, you'll see the animation from start to finish. Okay? And you'll see that shadow move depending on the time of day. And it actually tells you on the right-hand side here what time of day that is. So it just allows me to, depict the sun and its movement throughout the day and how that impacts the shadows cast by my design. So that's the new solar axis studies for 2014. So that does it for this particular CADcast. For others, check out youtube.com/DDi CAD or DDiCAD.com/TechCenter. Thank you for joining.